Okay, we're back again. The Glass Bead Game Video 7, going through the entire list, 220 members of the Glass Bead Game who have created this perfect reality, this perfect synthesis of all of their ideas and their lives into this perfect reality of study of the self, study of reality, the study of God, eternity, aesthetics, artwork, beauty, qualia, all of the great, beautiful things in the world. Um, so we're just moving on to the uh, next list. We're on to the quantum physicists. Albert Einstein is next. Um, he proved that the world was relative, and also E equals mc squared, that matter and energy are equivalent, and the space-time continuum. So he linked time as one of the four dimensions. You have height, width, length, and you also have time, and that they are linked. Also that light is the speed limit of the universe, and some odd paradoxes come out of that as you approach the speed of light. Matter is shorter, becomes uh, heavier, lighter or heavier, I think heavier, as you approach speed of light. Um, and if you could travel at the speed of light, that time would stand still. If you were an actual photon traveling at the speed of light, time would stand still, which is really amazing. Um, the most important part of Albert Einstein to me is that he proved that the world is relative. Um, the world that we are perceiving is relative to everything else. And this really ties back to calculus and how we experience change. You know, that if there was only one thing in the universe, you would not experience change at all. It's only relative to something else. And this is the same for gravity, um, just motion and time, and everything is relative to something else. So that's very, very important. And especially when you try to get down to absolute truth of the universe, uh, you run into these paradoxes because everything's relative to everything else. Something's good to something else is bad, good and evil, and up and down, and this relative nature. So it's hard to get to the absolute truth given that. Next is Werner Heisenberg, who came up with the uncertainty principle, and I believe he did get the Nobel Prize. He proved that you could not know the location and direction of a particle at the same time. This was not a shortcoming of the scientific experiment, but was an actual elusive feature of nature, and that is the very important part of this. Again, when we try to get to absolute truth about being and existence, it has an elusiveness in its very nature. So he's definitely a 9 in the glass bead game. Erwin Schrödinger next came up with the Schrödinger cat's idea. We talk about superposition. In the double slit experiment, a photon can go through two slits at once in a state of unrealized superposition, states of potential, and they stay in that state, in an infinite state of superposition, not just two, but an infinite state of unrealized potential, until observed by a human mind, or the opportunity to observe by a human mind, which is really another mind-blowing fact. So then he came up with this idea that a cat, while unperceived, can be in a state of existence of dead or alive at the same time. this dual state, this hybrid state, until observed, and then you observe, okay, the cat's alive or the cat's dead. Something that just came to me is, can't the cat perceive its own existence and actualize its own existence? So that's a paradox. Stephen Hawking, A Brief History of Time, very well respected, wrote a book on space and time with Roger Penrose recently. It was very hard to read, very mathematical. But in the beginning of his book, A Brief History of Time, I got the inspiration or idea to come up with Megda's paradox, that perpendicular lines only become parallel when infinity merges with zero. If you think of perpendicular lines, and if this goes out to infinity, they will stay intersected out into a state of infinity. They will always be intersected once they become perpendicular or intersecting in any way. So due to infinity, they can never disengage. But given the fact that parallel lines exist, they must disengage at some point where the zero merges with infinity and become parallel. And recently I've been thinking about this, and I put this in Being and Time, is that our universe is relative. So is it possible that the perpendicular lines, intersecting lines, never disengage, and it just really is true? It just goes out into infinity and never disengage and become parallel. We go like this and we say, okay, this is parallel. So at some theoretical point out there, they disengaged. Euclid had a problem with this, apparently, with his fifth postulate in regards to parallel lines, speculating that, well, he couldn't prove his fifth postulate, which was in regards to, do parallel lines exist? And he tried avoiding using this postulate in his proofs, but apparently once he got into it about his 29th postulate or something, he had no choice but to use it. So that was kind of interesting. But I go back to this idea of relativity, that everything is relative to everything else, and intersecting lines are relative to each other. But so are parallel lines, so it kind of goes around and round and round. And just, again, this idea of everything is relative to everything else. If there was only one thing in the universe, you could not experience change. And this is part of calculus and this theory of relativity. So it's due to the fact that there's other things in the universe that you experience change in space and time and so forth. So that's really interesting when you think of it in terms of ultimate being. Next guy is John Stuart Bell. Proved entanglement in 1964, that two entangled pairs can instantaneously communicate anywhere in the universe, and this can even exceed the speed of light. It's an instantaneous communication. No information is actually traveled between the two entangled pairs, but it's just an omnipresent, instantaneous knowledge of the other pair. So this is absolutely phenomenal stuff. It proves the holistic nature of the universe, and that it is in communication with itself in its entirety. This is absolutely mind-blowing, amazing stuff. The universe is in communication with itself instantaneously at all times. Scientifically proven. So, around Thomas Young developed a double slit experiment in 1805. This really is the foundation of quantum mechanics. That he did this way back in 1805 is absolutely amazing. And they later, in 100 years later, the ramifications of all this was picked up on, and then quantum mechanics took off more. Let's see. Max Planck is critical to, he is one of the most important people that ever lived. In 1900, he proved that the reality we are perceiving, is discrete. He is the father of quantum mechanics, the quantum wave collapse. He proved that the reality we are perceiving is discrete and travels and exists in a state of variables of h units relative to everything else. And his statement that below a Planck unit, the smallest possible unit, and he tied this to h, this factor of h, that space and time do not exist below Planck unit of space or time or length or anything. So Max Planck is almost one of the most important guys that has ever existed and came up with this idea. So he proved that the universe is finite. Our universe, our perceived universe, is finite. So he is absolutely amazing. So it's finite and bound by nothing. There is no space, no time, no anything outside of our universe. And then you get to, is there possibly a many worlds interpretation, other realities outside of this finite universe? So Max Planck is absolutely one of the most important people to ever live. Niels Bohr came up with the theory of the atom in 1914. Had many discussions with Albert Einstein, and one that he had around 1930 about the nature of quantum mechanics, I guess, is what some consider the greatest intellectual discussion of all time. I have not seen it. Albert Einstein really was a realist, wanted to be a realist. God does not play dice. And Niels Bohr, through his quantum mechanics, challenged that, and all of the indeterminate, crazy things that come out of quantum mechanics is just this paradox that how the indeterminacy and all the craziness that happens in the quantum world is so different than the world that we live in, the Newtonian cause and effect world that we live in and can perceive, and that common sense dictates. These next two guys I always put together, Bryce DeWitt and Hugh Everett, came up with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, that yes, we exist in this perceived world, but that there's other unperceived worlds simultaneously existing out there as well. Hugh Everett, after a couple of years of this, developed this theory, and nobody took him seriously, so he just went back to the business world. And today, these views are being picked up upon by Lisa Randall and Brian Greene and some others, that they have validity. Roger Penrose is one of the most respected quantum physicists in the world. Wrote The Emperor's New Mind and worked with Stuart Hameroff coming up with this concept of the quantum mind, which I really like and could be potentially one of the most important ideas ever developed. He's very hard to read. He recently wrote this book with Albert Einstein on space and time. It's very mathematical. he has this other book about the, I can't remember, Big Blue Book on reality. It's like supposed to be the Bible of quantum mechanics. Very hard to read, but I read most of it. Louis de Broglie came up with the theory of wave-particle duality in 1924. Extremely important. The particle is the real world, the real quantized, discrete world in which we perceive, and then particles have this wave of potential, unrealized potential prior to being perceived. So that was a critical piece of quantum mechanics in 1924. John Wheeler came up with, he was the first to come up with the idea of black hole, and Stephen Hawking really expands on these ideas of the black hole, how space and time doesn't exist in there, and the nature of black holes, and all kinds of paradoxes come up when you think about black holes. But John Wheeler came up with the idea of it from bit. Everything is discrete, kind of like a computer. Everything comes out of these bits. But also, we have laws to the universe of gravity and planets going around the sun, and light is the speed limit of the universe, and all these laws which we live in the real world. But he theorized that beyond this, there may be law without law, or different laws at different levels. And at the quantum mechanical level, there's different laws. In the world we perceive, there's different laws, and possibly in this many worlds interpretation, there could be completely different counterintuitive laws. So he just came up with this idea of law without law, that there could almost even be an infinite amount of laws to the entire universe beyond our perceived world. Paul Dirac was involved with quantum mechanics. Eugene Wigner, Wigner's friend, he came up with this idea that someone collapses the wave function when they perceive a particle. But then, is that real in Wigner's friend's perspective if he is not perceiving his friend? So just that chain effect of, you know, almost like this solipsistic view of your mind creates your reality and other people's minds create their own realities. And what is the realism to all of that? It's just kind of a crazy thought and paradox. Mikio Kaku came up with the quantum future, talks about the future and where the world is going and how just unbelievable it's going to be and is now. I didn't really like his books that much. I should try to read those again. John Gribben wrote Schrodinger's Cat. Pauli was involved with quantum mechanics. David Bohm wrote about the implicate order, in which he believed that the universe has a consciousness, a qualia, built into the nature of it itself. This kind of ties back to this entanglement idea, that there is an intelligence in the universe built in. I should really read more about this guy. I did read his book on the implicate order, but that really is a important concept. Max Born, quantum mechanics. Richard Feynman next, who was a crazy guy that played the bongos. He really seems like a realist to me. Put a mathematical equation that he developed on the outside of his car. Played the bongos, like I said, at the local bar, and his videos are online, which are very good to watch in regards to quantum mechanics, his class videos. Lisa Randall is next, wrote Hidden Dimensions, believes in this many world theory, and tries to put this in words, her videos and books, and the videos in particular. She really picks her words in a way that you can understand these complicated ideas. And in her book, Knocking on Heaven's Door, talks about perspective. You need perspective like an artist, that when you're talking or thinking about the quantum mechanical world, a certain set of rules exist. And then when you're talking about the world we perceive, the Newtonian cause and effect world in our everyday lives, that's a different perspective. And that you need to have this perspective to understand it. And she collaborated with like 10 other artists, and they did a art exhibit in New York that tied quantum mechanics to creative art. And there's a video where she goes through all of this, and it's really quite good. Seth Lloyd is a quantum physicist involved with quantum computing, consciousness, and artificial intelligence. And he just believes that the universe is a computer. This consciousness is built in, it from bit, and that's how we need to understand the universe. Murray Gell-Mann, another quantum physicist that gets mentioned a lot, and I have him mentioned here in the Glass Bead game. Ontologists, we're on to Martin Heidegger. Let's see. Actually, we're at 21 minutes right now. Well, let me just finish these up. I'll try. Let's see. How long would it take? Yeah, I think I can just finish these up in a couple of minutes. The ontologist, Martin Heidegger, wrote Being and Time. His teacher was Edmund Husserl. In 1925, he wrote Being and Time and tried to get to the bottom of the nature of being. Being was just assumed to exist prior to him writing that book, and he said, no, you can't assume anything. And he went through with his Dasein and everything, and that book is very hard to read to me, but came up with that idea. So that idea is really amazing, that you can't take anything as a given. Also, in My Dinner with Andre, Wally says, if we would really experience our life, we would experience the decay of it towards death. I thought that was just a funny statement by Wallace Shawn. Edmund Husserl, again, was Martin Heidegger's teacher. This is the late 1800s, early 1900s. He's hard to read, but his whole, all of his writings are on the nature of being. Julian Barber wrote The End of Time, and he believed that there are these snapshots, these discrete, infinite amount of snapshots that exist, and that we are perceiving these snapshots in a discrete way, but these snapshots exist in a non-extension, transcendent form outside of space and time. That's the bottom line of his book. That these snapshots of here I'm standing, there I'm standing, and any change is it's not really change in his mind. They were just these pictures of these discrete units of pictures of reality. So that's kind of an interest. I liked reading his book. John McTaggart is next. Somebody said something about him that I really liked, that he was almost like a godlike figure. I can't remember the, like a platonic form. His existence was a platonic form, and I can't remember who said it. But he wrote The Unreality of Time and the Nature of Existence, and similar to Zeno, tried to prove through logic that time and change really can exist. John Paul Sartre wrote Being and Nothingness, and I did a video on the three natures of being, which actually turned out pretty good because his book is so long and complicated. I summed it up into a short video. He summed up his views of being were the one was the world in which we live, which we perceive. That was being for others. Being for itself was the mind, and had the ability to perceive the world, the being for others, the actual world in which we live, but it also had the capability of perceiving the being in itself, which was this nothingness of a being below it. Our true nature is this being without extension and eternal below it. And I did a video that turned out surprisingly really good. David Lewis studied ontology. Gilbert Ryle, ontology, came up with the ghost in the machine, that there's this reality that we're perceiving, but there's this elusive ghost in there with a mind and a free will. And then David Armstrong studies ontology, and Peter Inwagen. I read his entire book on metaphysics, and I liked it, but he seems, I think he may be a professor at Notre Dame, but it seemed very down to earth and realistic, his book on metaphysics. So I got through the ontologists. We're at 26 minutes now. Video 7 of the Glass Bead Game Society, the development of this perfect reality and beautiful world which we live, this sanctuary of beauty and wonderful existence that exists secretly outside of the corrupt, evil world out there.